All right, scholars, greetings. This first video is 15 minutes and it's going to cover some really basic of the article. And I'll do a couple of these in 15-minute segments so that they're not too long and you can get to the meat of what you need at any point in time. So it obviously gives you the title. And no, we're not going over searching and finding this. It obviously gives you the title, a systematic review and a meta-analysis. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis are high levels of data or high levels of evidence, high levels of research because they pull research from across different databases. This article also tells you exactly who the authors are. Feel free to Google their names if you want to know more about them and the work that they do so that you can decide whether or not these authors are um, based on their evidence or their research lines. Are they experts in this area? Are they new in this area? Is this an area that they are well known in? Is this an area that they can be or should be writing in? Or is this a brand new area? You can learn all of that by uh, taking a look at the research team. So now the method, the abstract. So let's walk through it. So this is the abstract. In this paper, the abstract has 4 parts: the aim, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. Now, uh, if you've never read a scientific paper, this is a good one to start with because it lays it out very clearly on what's the purpose, that's the aim, what did we do to get to that purpose, that's your methods, what were the results of that purpose or that method, and that's your results. And then what do we think? Right, the conclusion. What do we think? How will we tie this together? How do we relate it back into the literature? What do we really think about this? Now, so we know that their purpose or their aim was to evaluate the effectiveness of breastfeeding on long-term and short-term maternal health outcomes. They looked at 6 outcomes. They looked at breast and ovarian cancer 2 separate times. They looked at osteoporosis. They looked at diabetes, lactational amenorrhea, which is your menstruation. They looked at postpartum depression and postpartum weight change. That's way more than 6, but okay. And what did they do? They did a literature review and they used 3 databases: PubMed, Cochrane, and KABI databases. In the US, we don't you have access to KBI. I believe it is a free database, but it's not a database that I personally would have done a systematic review in, depending on where in the world I'm looking for a systematic review. So, whereas the other 2 databases, Cochrane is also found in PubMed, and this article is from 2015, and so it's very possible that PubMed had not added Cochrane Library yet because I honestly don't remember the timeline of them adding it. So I think the method is so far solid. We'll decide that when we get to the search. The next thing we want to know is, so how did they do a meta-analysis? What data did they use? Did they gather? Did they collect for a meta-analysis? And if you're like, hold on, Ms. Logan, I don't know what a meta-analysis is. I think I kind of get a systematic review. Use your friend Google and keep a dictionary with you on these terms. There's nothing wrong with that, but you're going to have to do some of that work to learn. But a meta-analysis is pooling numbers together, basically. So then you're saying, okay, on the basics of you pulled numbers together, what numbers did they pull together? They pulled the outcome estimates. Estimates, remember, so not actual outcomes, just outcome estimates. They used odds ratios, relative risks, and they used standardized mean differences, excuse me. So these are 3 different kinds of pieces of data, and they pulled them together. And just to make sure that we're both on the same page, because I want to show you what I do when I don't know something, because there's like going to be times where you don't know. So explaining odds ratio, I can see this is from PubMed or NIH, so I don't have to go no further. It says an odds ratio is a measure of association between exposure and an outcome. A measure of association between exposure and outcome. So basically, how are these two things, the exposure and the outcome, related, right? Um, so it goes on to say that the odds ratio represents the odds, gambling odds, that something will occur or outcome will occur in a given particular exposure. Now, take that definition. Let's go back to the article and say, so the outcome estimates of the exposure, breastfeeding, on the outcome, these diseases, long term, short term diseases. That's what it is. So they're taking that number. So then the other question is, well, okay, I kind of got odds ratio. I could keep that in my head. What about relative risk? And I'm intentionally using the epidemiology public health definitions because if you use a dictionary definition, it might sway you a little too far to the left. So then risk ratio or relative risk compares the risk of a health event, which would be all the long-term and short-term consequences, the maternal health outcomes, among one group of people with the other among another group of people. So it compares group A and group B, those with the disease or risk factor, with the group with the risk of another group. So putting these two terms together, right? And this is from CDC's Principles of Epidemiology, which is a very old textbook that lots of people use. We can also see, if we go down, another NIH from Stat Pearls is another book that we use. And it again says the relative risk is the ratio of the risk of an event, the cancers, the long-term maternal health outcomes, for the exposure group versus the non-exposure group. So the piece that you might have missed in this is that one group of people has been exposed and the other group of people has not. So you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, is that an outcome that can be pooled with an odds ratio? Now that's a question for a statistician, because that would be the question I have. Are these things can actually be pulled? Not can they, should they? Because a lot of things we can do, but sometimes we should ask, should we? Should odds ratio or relative risk or standardized mean be pulled together to do a meta-analysis? Should they? That, like I said, is a question for a statistician. Now, a standardized mean difference, and they did correct my spelling, thank you. Looking from the Cochrane Handbook, remember they use the Cochrane Library. I didn't mean to click on it. And can't hardly read that because I'm getting old. So the standardized mean difference is used as a summary statistic in a meta-analysis when studies all assess the same outcome but measure it in a variety of ways. So this tells us already that in a meta-analysis, which that paper is, you can pull or assess these different outcomes measured in different ways. So remember how we just asked, should we? Is this a proper statistical procedure? Based on the definition of a standardized mean difference, I would go with yes. And then it gives you the formula, and let's keep going back to the article. So now we got an idea of the outcome estimates, odds ratio, relative risk, standardized mean differences. And we know that those pieces of information were pooled together. So they're not individually, they're taking the whole group and pooling it together to come up with an understanding. And then they did subgroup analysis and meta regression were also explored. And those are just statistical techniques. All right. So the next part is the results. So by pulling all of this information, what happened? What did they find? They found that if you breastfeed longer, more than 12 months, that the association with breast and ovarian cancer was reduced by 26 and 37% respectively. Um, we would have to go and see if that reduction is high, low, is it useful? That might be a question to ask. Maybe it doesn't matter, because as long as that there's some reduce, if there's some amount of risk reduced, which would lessen your chance of getting breast or getting ovarian cancer, then breastfeeding is the thing to do, so that you can reduce your chances of breastfeeding, in this case, longer than 12 months. So you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute now, how long are we supposed to breastfeed? Aha, it will talk about that in the introduction, which I'm going to skip in this video because this is just on the abstract. But generally speaking, the World Health Organization has said that you should exclusively breastfeed from the time the baby comes out of your uterus for the first 6 months. Exclusively. Baby gets nothing else but breast milk, human milk. After 6 months, then up to at least 2 years, give breast milk and complementary foods. So that is the definition. And you might be saying to yourself, oh, I don't know anybody that did that. Now you know, make your decisions. All right. So then what else did they find out? They also found out that they didn't find any conclusive evidence in the association between breastfeeding and bone marrow density. So what does that mean? That means either the articles, they didn't find any articles, or that the articles were inconclusive, or that the articles found no evidence, right? So it just depends on how many articles they found and what did they find. And we don't know that based on these results, based on the abstract. We'll have to dig into the paper and read the results. And again, I'll do that on the next video. In terms of diabetes, they saw that breastfeeding, notice there's no date, right? So the first one, we saw that breastfeeding more than 12 months was associated, whereas breastfeeding here just says breastfeeding was associated with 32% lower risk of diabetes, which means you have to not have had diabetes, including gestational diabetes, to be able to have a lower risk of diabetes. Okay. But I also want to point out they didn't put a time on it. So does that mean breastfeeding for 1 month is the same as breastfeeding for 6 months, is the same as 12 months? We don't know in this abstract. We have to read the paper further to see if they answered those questions. They could be doing what some authors do and making that connection to say everything in the article is, everything in this is more than 12 months. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know that. It doesn't say that. So let's not draw conclusions where it doesn't say. The next sentence says, exclusive breastfeeding, which remember, that's that 0 to 6 months, and then predominant breastfeeding, which means after the 6 months to continue on with complementary foods and breast milk. That time frame is associated with a longer duration of not menstruating. Remember, amenorrhea is not menstruating, not having your period. So, and that's good, because the longer you delay the start of menstruation, as if you can turn it on and turn it off yourself, the longer menstruation is delayed in your body. Let me say it that way. The longer menstruation is delayed, the less chance you have of producing an egg that then can get fertilized and more children can be produced, or the possibility of more children produced. And why is that good? Because oftentimes people are worried about a person having too many babies close together, which is why breastfeeding in this case is, they're saying it is associated with a longer not having your menstrual cycle. It is also associated with a shorter duration of, I'm sorry, really start again.